was a Marian revolution. So let's just say one Hail Mary as our opening prayer. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus. Pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thanks for coming. If it's an incentive required or whatever, but it's I know some of you aren't required. I'm Leland. So I was asked by the office of the VP for Mission Integration to give this talk. I've actually given it, this is my third iteration of the talk. Fourth, if you include the time when I talked to the social apostolate of the Jesuits. And usually when I talk to students about it, I like to begin with who I am. The obvious is that I teach development studies here. Some of you are my students. And I'm also Assistant Vice President for essentially social development and sustainable development of the university. But for a talk like EDSA, I think it's necessary to situate myself historically. I was already alive during the EDSA revolution of 1986. But I was young, I was 13. And it was a different 13 because I didn't grow up here. When I was 5 years old, my parents moved me to Bangkok, Thailand. And I grew up in an international school environment in Bangkok up till 1985. So I was there. And then I chose to come back to the Philippines for my high school. I begin with that because prior to 1983, I did not know anything about Philippine politics. I was 10 years old. And the first time I became alerted that there was such a thing as Philippine politics was when we received a call at home in Bangkok. And it was our Tito Johnny, for the older ones among you, Juan Mercado, the reporter. Tito Johnny, a family friend, I know he was a reporter. And then he asked for my mom. I gave the phone to my mom. And then my mom started crying. And then I said, after the phone call, I said, Ma, what happened? 10-year-old boy. And she said, Ninoy died. Or they killed Ninoy. And I told my mom, who's Ninoy? It's not as if I was in Bangkok all the time. I'd be here for summer vacations. I'd be here for Christmas. But I didn't know anything. I didn't know Ninoy. I didn't know Marcos was the president. I probably knew Marcos was the president, but I didn't know what was going on. So when she said they killed Ninoy, and then that's when she started talking. It's very isolated from the rest of the world. But even back then, much more in the 1980s, it was really isolated. And I'd just be flashing laban signs of whatever car would pass in front of us. No, that was the extent of my political involvement as a 12-year-old. I would have wanted to go to EDSA, but I don't think my brothers and sisters would have brought me because it wasn't safe. And we were always prepared to evacuate. I think that kind of story also makes me sort of an insider, outsider. No, I was there, but I was not quite there. No, having lived in Bangkok, parang I had some distance from what was going on. But I was very much aware by 1983 of what was going on. So that's where I'm coming from. And I'll spend about 30 minutes. I'll read a lot of it just so that I don't veer off as much. But I'm hoping for a discussion afterwards. This may not be what you expect. This talk may not be what you expect. For those who really are believers in EDSA, baka cold shower siya. The talk might be a bit of a cold shower. I hope that it resonates with the young, who may not be as attached to EDSA. So let me just begin reading so that I don't waste too much time. I think for a lot of us here, the EDSA People Power Revolution was a triumph of democracy, victory of democracy, and all its values over dictatorship. It affirmed the value of free and fair elections, the rule of law, human rights, and everything associated with liberal democracy. And then what happened? President Duterte was elected, and he seriously assaulted democratic principles with his drug war. He disparaged human rights, including the right to life, and he illegally detained Laila de Lima. So I think I have slides. Yeah, that's the EDSA revolution. For the young ones, this is Bongbong in military fatigues. The day before they left for, the day that they left for Hawaii. So the election of President Duterte was one serious assault, and then of course what happened after was that you elected the son of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. And it seemed to upend everything that was gained in 1986. A lot of the EDSA warriors, we were just talking about it earlier, are kind of depressed, no? Because you overthrew him in 1986 and then suddenly his son is the president. One of my main points is that I've been wondering if those of us who believe in liberal democracy read too much into the successful people power revolution. We sort of projected what it meant to other people. I wonder if we were right in believing that democratic principles had won over dictatorship. The belief was reinforced by the passage of the 1987 Constitution, that's the Constitutional Assembly, which contained distinctly progressive elements. So, you overthrow Marcos, you put in a constitution, democracy wins. Right? But even soon after the 86 revolution, there were already signs that the democratic dream was a bit too good to be true. And it started with the 1988 Congress. And the local elections heralded the return of the traditional politicians into power. Back then, Mitra was the traditional politician of all traditional politicians. With that came the watering down of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law. Progressives were also slowly eased out of the Aquino cabinet, Butch Abad, Silvestre Bellio. Some members of civil society tried to run for local elections, and they lost really badly. In 1992, the progressives, including myself, rallied to support Salonga and Pimentel in 1992. But that pairing lost badly too. They even lost to Imelda and Coangco, Danding Coangco. I think they were 6th out of 7. Some ran and won. Some progressives ran and won through the party list system, like Sinarizo Ontiveros. But if you notice, over time, the number of progressives has been dwindling. Even the Makabayan bloc, parang konti na lang sila sa House of Representatives. I think I inserted an image here. Okay, no. I attended the conversation after the 2022 election, and one analyst said, it was a conversation among political analysts, no? So I was fortunate to have been invited to that conversation. And one analyst said that Filipinos like strong men. The gender is intended. Filipinos like strong men, but they want their strong men to be elected. Maybe Marcos's mistake was that he hung on to power too long without going through the exercise of a real election. No? There was a fake election in 1981, but it wasn't a real election. And even then, according to NAMFREL data I saw lately, if you check Wikipedia, that's one source, but there are other sources, he only lost by over 4%. Aquino, 52, Marcos, 48. That's NAMFREL data. So he still had the support of 48% of the population in 1986, which was still a pretty formidable base, right? Still pretty solid. The opposition slogan of the 1986 election is actually quite instructive. Sobra na, tama na, palitan na. Or tama na, sobra na, palitan na. Sobra na could mean abuse of power, which is how we interpret it. But for most, I think sobra na meant he's overstaying without a renewed mandate. It's also interesting that the word used is sobra, because if it isn't excessive, then it can be tolerated. And Filipinos are like that, diba? Pag hindi pa excessive, pwede pang pagtiisan. So maybe for many people outside my Facebook feed, EDSA People Power was about the replacement of an overstaying ruler with someone else. Okay, personality, not rule of law, human rights, democracy, etc. It just so happened that that someone who replaced him also espoused liberal democratic values, which led progressives to believe that democratic principles had triumphed over dictatorship. But maybe in the end, for most people, it was really about personalities. I think, yeah, there's a study by Henson that suggests that the desire to oust Marcos was the major accomplishment of EDSA, not democracy, human rights, rule of law. Right? It's to replace Marcos. Interestingly, it's the religious sector suggests that people power can be used for cases like human rights violations, abuse of power, oppression, and injustice. The other sector said it's to replace Marcos. This is a UP CIDS study, I think around 1990s. And one of my thinkings now is that the people who support EDSA are what I call the moral class, the moral political class. Na medyo may pagka-religious yung orientation. Okay, so we have mass, for example, like we had mass kanina 12:30. They have mass in EDSA Shrine, etc. But events after 1986 suggest that EDSA did not radically transform Philippine democracy. It nearly restored the pre-martial law politics, and this is pretty commonplace in political analysis. I can't even say it restored patronage politics, because Marcos himself was the patron of all patrons. Diba? So EDSA replaced patrons. If not at the national level, then certainly at the local level. One interesting tidbit is that Duterte became OIC vice mayor of Davao because his mom supported Cory. And that's where history begins. No? He eventually ends up president. And patrons matter because political patrons are the ones you run to in times of need. And this is one of the critical points. So in a sense, the first point really is that I think we've overread into EDSA. I think for most people, it was removing Marcos and not really about democracy, human rights, rule of law. As I'll argue later on, a lot of people don't quite get that, what that's all about. And then the other point is that we really didn't change the political system. The patronage politics is still there. And patrons matter because political patrons are the people you run to in times of need, when you're sick, when you need burial assistance, when you need educational assistance, and so on and so forth. Of course, this is not applied to us, pero for a lot of people out there, you run to the political patron. I know a recent candidate who was made godfather, ninong of many a wedding, without being asked if he could be ninong, with the expectation that he would financially support all the weddings. My former student, I ran for political office. He lost that election. Then he won the next one. When I worked for a senatorial campaign, Teddy Bagilats, I was in charge of his Facebook page. Most of the messages we got were for solicitations. After a while, it became difficult. It was like Chinese water torture, drip, drip, drip. Okay, all of those requests for solicitations, and Teddy didn't have the money to give out money to all these people. One of the points I'll make later is that we have a growing lower middle class, and the opposition may have failed to account for this in 2022. The lower middle class are people who may be able to eat 2 or 3 times a day and send their children to public schools, but they are one serious disease away from poverty. Every time I go to field, that's what they say. The stories of them getting sick or a family member getting sick and then they're back in poverty. It's also in this context that we can also situate climate change and natural disasters. They have houses that are most likely to be flood prone. Their livelihoods are most likely to be affected. When I gave this talk last Nueva Ecija, yung mga palay nila, dapa. Okay, we were about to go in immersion there for some government officials, and that was the situation. And obviously, we don't have disaster prevention strategies in place. I think it's hard for us to imagine, but for many people, the politician is the social protection mechanism of the poor or the lower middle class. The politicians in Congress understand this. They know it. Thus, the proliferation of patronage funds for programs such as ACAP. I don't know the other programs anymore. There's another one for medical. There's another one for labor. And the reduction of funds for programs such as 4Ps, because 4Ps is a lot less vulnerable to patronage because the beneficiaries are identified by DSWD and not the politicians. And this has implications in terms of the electoral battle between Lenny and BBM. If you think in terms of patronage, who would be the most effective patron? The richest man in the Philippines, backed by Italiano Gold or Yamashita Gold, right? Or the lady who has a genuine heart for the poor, but she's not rich. Ba't ako hingi dyan? Walang pera yan. Diba? Doon ako sa mayaman. Okay. I've come to believe that for most people, the most important politician is the mayor. I hear this a lot. Whenever I go out, I confirm my hypothesis. Because the mayor is the most accessible politician with resources. Everyone above the mayor, hindi na maabot yan. It's the mayor who's the most accessible. Maybe that's why Duterte insisted, even while he was president, on being called mayor. Kasi alam niya yung mayor malapit sa puso ng mga tao. And people know that in order for mayors to have resources, they must be on the same side as the winning president. That's why the survey of around August before the election is important. Kasi kung mukhang ito yung mananalo, ito yung susuportahan ko. So mayors are inclined to support the most likely presidential winners. Kaya nung bandang August, nung mukhang nananalo na si Bongbong, lalo na nung nagsama sila ni Sara, medyo mahirap na yan. Okay, mahirap na yan. The system of patronage persists up until today. The EDSA revolution clearly did not upend that, which may account for why corruption in politics persists up to today. There's an article I wrote on PSR. It was actually a response to Randy David, not so much an empirical article. Because Randy David was wondering, why do people keep electing corrupt people? That's what he said. And I said, people think of all politicians as corrupt. Lahat. Name it. Lenny, Bam. Corrupt lahat yan. Okay? That's the assumption. Even those who say they are not, and maybe especially those who say they are not. O so sabihin mo, hindi ako corrupt, mas lalong sususpetsahan kang corrupt ka. But people have an unspoken sense that corruption is what enables continued patronage, which in the end benefits them. So, if you run on an anti-corruption platform, especially now, it doesn't necessarily resonate. I attended a forum where progressive lawmakers, one a future governor and another a future vice president, said that the removal of pork barrel funds during the administration of Benigno Aquino Jr. Nagrally kasi yung mga tao after that. Tapos nagrally about pork barrel. So tinanggal ni Noy Noy yung pork barrel. But these two progressive representatives back then said it undermined them because the constituents still demand for assistance, but they don't have pork barrel as a source of funds. Hindi naman sila mayaman. Right? So where will they get the money to provide assistance to their constituents? It was so amazing listening to these two progressive lawmakers talk about the difficulties they face because they didn't have pork barrel. while their political opponents had already gotten rich because of past corruption and could afford dole-outs. So how are they going to win if their political opponents continue that system of patronage, but they can't because they don't have pork barrel funds? As I said earlier, I was working with Congressman Teddy Bagilat, and based on my experience and the experience of my friends and students who run political campaigns, the demand for dole-outs are numerous. We tend to think of patronage as supply side. We're not conscious of the demand side. In fact, when I talk to former students who are running in politics, it's the demand side that they talk about. It's demanded of them. I was talking to a vice gubernatorial candidate recently. I said, how much? Magkano ng bayaran ngayon? 3,000 to 5,000 per vote. Local level. I talked to a former student who's also running local level, but he's aware of the politics. Sabi, how much? And he said, there was a congressman who paid 10,000 per vote. Per vote. Okay? It's demanded. I seriously doubt the salary of a senator or a politician would be enough to cover these kinds of expenses. I guess this is one of the summary points here. Corruption is both supply and demand. And that's why it persists. And we have this system of patronage, which the EDSA revolution did not eliminate. It didn't. Right? And in fact, I was thinking to myself earlier that we celebrate 86. But I think we also have to keep in mind what happened in 88. the congressional elections, where all the patronage, the traditional politicians came back. And then 89, the local elections, when all of those traditional politicians came back. Diba? We celebrate 86, but we're blind to what happened in 88 and 89. Point one, patronage politics. That's the strength of informal institutions I talk about in the title. Point two, I suspect that for a lot of people on the ground, a lot of the democratic principles that we talk about ring hollow because they do not experience these themselves. The rule of law and human rights are easily disregarded on the ground. What happened to Laila de Lima has happened and is happening in many communities everywhere. Due process is for the rich and for those who can afford a lawyer. And even when you can afford a lawyer, like Laila de Lima, you can still be denied due process. And this is the attraction of someone like Duterte, who admits to liquidating people without due process and for planting evidence. This isn't bureaucratic, and it is accessible. That is also the attraction of Tulfo justice. We cry foul on human rights violations from Tukhang, and rightly so. But for the lower middle class and the poor, who are not safe from drug users and pushers, and who are denied access to justice, Duterte justice and Tulfo justice is all they have. That's it. These are far from the democratic ideal, but this is what is accessible to most people. That is the form of justice that works for them. 2028 for me is, of course, Sara Duterte. But the other candidate is Tulfo. Any one of them. Probably Rafi. He would be the most competitive against Sara. Romualdez, I don't think so. A small note on Romualdez. The people I talk to about politics say, you first have to be popular. You can't buy your way into an election. And we've seen cases like that in 1992, in 1998, very traditional politicians who did not win and were nowhere near winning. So you can have all the patronage that you have, but if you're not popular to begin with, medyo mahirapan kang manalo. But the Tulfos are popular. The lower middle class are people who live in a house and are pretty much able to secure their basic needs. But since they do not live in gated subdivisions, their houses are generally vulnerable to criminality, particularly in urban areas. The threat of criminality from those on drugs, especially in urban areas, is very real. Hindi inimbento ni Duterte, especially in urban areas. It's very real, which is why Duterte's campaign promise of eliminating drugs was effective, especially in urban areas. According to a WR Numero survey, the war on drugs, this one, the fourth one, was the most popular policy in the last 40 years. 85% of people supported the war on drugs. This is 2023, after Duterte. Guess what the second most popular policy is? Martial law. Yes. Martial law. The Philippines wants strong men. Okay. And this is validated in conversations I have with people. There was a senatoriable who said that people felt safer when Duterte was president. And some people scoff at that. But that's what I hear from people on the ground. They felt safer when Duterte was president. Right? I think one thing we have to know about the lower middle class is that their sense of insecurity makes them prefer authoritarians. In the United States, part of the coalition that got Trump elected in 2016 and 2024 were the lower middle class. High school graduates, di nakapag-college. I looked at the World Value Survey, and this is a very interesting statistic. No? 1 to 10, are you left or are you right? 1 is left, 10 is right. And if you just split it down the middle, 1 to 5 is left, 6 to 10 is right. In 1995, Philippines, 50.6% right. This is 2010 to 2014, 59.7% right. Duterte, 2017 to 2022, 62.3% right. We're moving right. The country is moving right. Not liberal democratic, pero medyo pagka-right. No? And here's a sub-point. No? Ironically, this makes people resent those who advocate the rule of law. The resentment against the oligarchy is not just because of socioeconomic inequality, but most importantly, on the resentment on a certain moral political culture. You might want to read the work of Kusaka, published by Ateneo de Manila University Press on moral politics. How does this work? Pinoy won the election of 2010 on an anti-corruption message. But this was after 9 years of a very unpopular Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, which was marked by scandals like Hello Garci, and then she was giving out envelopes full of cash to lawmakers and even clergy. No, she was giving out wads of cash to bishops. For quite some time, Aquino's main rival was a politician who built roads to benefit his own subdivision, which made the slogan, Daang Matuwid, a critique against his opponent. He also proclaimed, kung walang korap, walang mahihirap. So, yun yung taglines ni Pinoy in 2010. In the end, though, such moralistic tones proved to be a disadvantage. Kasi the problems with disbursement acceleration program, the pork barrel controversy, and then we in the Ateneo community contributed to the friendly fire by joining all of those rallies, seemed to belie the assertion that the administration was matuwid and reinforce the whole notion that all politicians were corrupt. And then you had events like the Luneta hostage crisis and SA 44, which made the administration look aloof and incompetent. And of course, a lot of the opposition happily provided spin. And then what happened? 2016, The battle lines were drawn between Mar Rojas, who was the disente candidate, and Rodrigo Duterte, who would not have provided a sharper contrast, the foul-mouthed, but perceived to be effective mayor who made Davao City a progressive city. More than the allure of Davao, or a Visayan-speaking candidate with roots from Cebu, and is claimed to be the first serious presidential from Mindanao, I think Duterte's innate foul-mouthedness and antics endeared him to many people. And this endearment lasted throughout his term. People loved him. People still love Duterte. According to a survey conducted by WR Numero, I think it's the same one, Duterte is the most popular president. Second most popular president, Marcos Sr. Right? There's a saying that what people remember is not what you did, but how you made them feel, and Duterte made people feel like he was theirs. At one point, his slogan was "Atento pre." Actually, ang galing. Atento pre. Here was a politician who naturally spewed expletives left and right. In his weekly local program, mumurahin niya yung mga local government officials niya. Kumakain siya sa karinderya, very comfortably, no? And was reputed to drive taxis at night in his city to know the condition of his people. Contrast that to the candidate who branded himself as decente, sounded awfully awkward when he cursed. Look it up on YouTube, Mar Rojas, putang ina. It's not a pretty sight. No? Masyadong malumana eh. Looked like he was trying too hard driving a padyak for a commercial. I don't know if you remember that. Nagpadyak si Mar Rojas. And lives in a place called the White House, which occupies an entire city block and cannot even be seen from the outside. Okay. Beyond resentment toward the oligarchy, I think Duterte was able to tap into the resentment people had at how the liberals made them feel about themselves. With Duterte, they were freer to be themselves and comfortable in their own skin. It was EDSA tres all over again, but on a national level, and the outcomes were more favorable to them. This one I think you can relate to. What about Lenny? Aside from being associated with the Dissente movement, and while Lenny really has a genuine heart for the poor, the vast majority of voters are no longer poor, but are already lower middle class. Maybe they cannot relate when they are branded as nasalaylayan and actually feel insulted. When you say that nasalaylayan sila, I remember the negative sentiment generated when the campaign had a rally in Tondo, and the rally's tagline was, "Itodo mo Tondo sa piling ng laylayan." Nagkaalit yung mga taga-Tondo. Natawag mo kaming laylayan. The backlash was pretty harsh. And then maybe this is why people reacted to lugaw. Diba, naglugaw campaign tayo, di ba? Lugaw, pagkain na may hirap yan eh. Tapos si Cagliodi piled on, di ba? Sabi niya yung maputlang spaghetti. Bibigay ka na ng spaghetti, kulang pa ng sauce. Sana nagpa-jolly spaghetti ka na lang, di ba? So, medyo off. I recently saw Laila de Lima's, yung kay Nadine Lustre. Di ba, Nadine is supporting the ML party list. Medyo off ako dun sa commercial na yun. Number one, because laban. Parang I don't think Filipinos wanna fight. Secondly, yung tagline ni Laila sa huli, Laila para sa laylayan. Oh no, here we go again. Diba? Whose hearts are you gonna win by calling them laylayan? Beyond Lenny, I think we have to be reflexive about our own practices. We or some of our political class look down on people, maybe inadvertently. The worst among us may talk of bobotante. For example, I really hated one poster I saw during the 2022 campaign. I think, therefore, I'm pink. I really hated that. In fact, I was on the group saying, take it down. No, this isn't helping. And even when we don't talk of Bobotante, we do voters' education, but have strong suggestions on who we want them to vote for. Obvious naman eh. We also look down upon them accepting cash for votes, but in a world where national politics doesn't matter to their lives, the only value of voting may be that cash that they receive. Two incidents. I was invited to that post-election gathering of analysts who were mostly pro-Lenny and maybe one pro-Isko. And we were trading all sorts of explanations on what happened. While we were talking, I couldn't help but look at the servers. This was a hotel setting. And then there were servers serving us water, food. And I wondered, what do they think? Why are they not part of the conversation? They're probably the Marcos voters we're talking about. Why can't they join the conversation? There was another incident where the students, this was last year, commemorated the 50th anniversary of martial law 2 years ago. And everyone was looking at the stage. This was at the Red Brick Road. I had to go home early, so I left the stage area. And then I was walking away from the stage area. There were security guards. And they were watching. I was wondering, what do they think about what's going on? They had no voice. On the way home, was it yesterday or the other day, I was going home and then I passed by the diversion road. And then I saw maintenance personnel tying yellow ribbons on the gate. I couldn't help but ask myself, what do they think? Tayo ang naglalagay sa mga tao sa laylayan by not including them in the conversations. Remember in 2022, the campaign thought it would be a good idea to canvass in neighborhoods, door to door. And I attended the trainings. You were told to ask questions first about what people's issues were. And after listening, tell them how Lenny would address these concerns. This is a perfect example of listening to reply. Right? Di ka naman talaga nakikinig. Transactional yung paglapit mo. And people knew that. And I think more often than not, people would say, sige, boboto namin. Pero actually, hindi. So now we have a situation where the strength of patronage politics, my first point, has been doubled down by the politics of resentment. Not only has EDSA not erased patronage politics, it has also led to resentment against the democratic class. They hate us. I tell my students, it's like Parasite, that Korean movie. No? So what must we do? I think first, we have to come to grips that we really are, that we who are committed to democratic principles and all that it stands for, we're a minority. We're a minority. The vast majority of our countrymen do not value democratic principles as much as we do. Oh, they value elections. They really value elections, but they do not experience much of the other principles of democracy like the rule of law or human rights. Day to day, no. They want these things, but they know that in practice, it's power. Power that prevails. And why are we surprised? It's not just in political power, but even in workplaces and families, di ba? It's not a democracy, it's obedience. Practice more than democratic deliberation. We must remember that all of these democratic institutions are, by and large, transplanted from other countries. It did not grow organically in the Philippines. Our traditional politicians are very much attuned to predominant informal practices. And they find ways to adapt the trappings of democracy to forms beyond their original intention. In a sense, the traditional politicians know the people more than we do. Some of us have been educated to value liberal democratic principles, but we have become divorced from the everyday experience of the majority of our countrymen. Ang layo. Layo talaga. I think we have to educate ourselves by listening. It's not they who need voters' education. We need education about the voters. We need to be educated about the voters. I like to say nowadays that we may be overeducated. Tayo. We're overeducated in terms of liberal democracy, human rights, rule of law, and undereducated about how things really work. We must educate ourselves about how things really work. More and often than not, lower middle class, vulnerable, and vulnerabilities addressed through informal mechanisms. But we are schooled in the formal, not the informal. In economics, we are taught monetary policy, but we're not taught 5-6. Or the financial and market relationship between the farmer and the input supplier. We are taught the 3 branches of government, but we don't understand the workings of informal politics. We are taught about the rule of law, especially in law school, but not how justice is rendered on the ground, which is very different from how things should be. I think it's only when we understand informal practices that we can gradually transform society with an emphasis on the word gradual. We have to acknowledge that change won't happen overnight, but at least we'll know what direction we should be headed in. I think it's important for us to work for institutions that reduce the need for patronage. Yun yung isang project. How do we reduce patronage? I'm not defining it in terms of rule of law, human rights. For me, the central problem, immediate problem, is how do you reduce patronage? You need a working health insurance system and universal health care. Kasi nga, number 1 source of vulnerability is health. We already have the universal health care law. PhilHealth has a lot of money. We need to push PhilHealth and the DOH to provide more health services so that you're not dependent on an endorsement from a politician. That's a very concrete thing that we can do. We need an economy that generates stable employment through the private sector and is able to provide accessible commodities and services. We need a functional educational system that produces quality graduates who can easily find high-quality employment. We need institutionalized social security for disadvantaged sectors like the elderly and the unemployed. In other words, we must depoliticize social protection. For me, that's the way to go. We must support LGUs that are moving away from politicized social protection mechanisms. Although the warning here, Sir Alex and I were just in a conversation with some people from a particular locality, and they said, yes, it's not dole out anymore, but the system has become bureaucratized. So, ang tagal bago lumabas ng pera. Pag ganyan, vulnerable si politician kasi yung mga traditional politician, no questions asked, bigay ka agad ng pera. Diba? 30 years ago, Father Nebres was already saying that we should pay more attention to local governments because they can get a lot of things done. It took me a while to understand what he was saying, but I agree with him now. Look at the local governments. I'm not paying too much attention to the Senate. Looking at the local governments. The key is to have good local government officials. For those of you who are into law especially, we have to work to make justice more accessible through security and justice sector reforms. I know a lot of us are depressed, and maybe my talk depressed you a bit more. It's easy to despair because we look at the experiences of other countries and see that democracies seem to be on firmer footing, although recently that may not be as true with what happened to America with the developments in Germany. But I think we must put these into perspective and bring to mind that democracy in these countries grew organically. No? They grew organically. And it took centuries for them to evolve. Tell my students, the Magna Carta of England was signed in 1215. Genuine democracy in England probably was not established until 1688. 473 years later. right? Take some time. Take some time. Natawa siya. Our formal democratic practices are essentially transplants, and our democracy is relatively young. In Filipino, we say, marami pa tayong bigas na kakainin. That's it for my inputs. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you. Sariling sikap ako dito. So please, if you have any questions or reactions, no? I'm curious about your reactions. Yes, Mary. Mary's always ever reliable.
Yeah. So I'm in the Department of Social Anthro, and I really teach anthropology. There are so many things I think that all of us could say. Well, let me just start by making a little bit of a quip. I always called economics the gloomy science. But after this, you want the gloomy science? Fortunately, Dr. Leland did end. These are the things that need to be done, right? And by implication, that's the thing that civil society. That's where the action has to be to put the pressure on the vulnerable part of the political side. Okay, but having said that, let me just read what you said. That we have a real social class issue here, no? Of people feeling disenfranchised or alienated because wala naman sila respeto sa amin. We hear that all the time. Let's say, you know. The other thing is, you mentioned Garrido, or anyway, the two books that two ethnographies, local on politics, both the statement that, Duterte, alam naman namin, Duterte and ERAP, their moral flaws, but they never look down on us. See, and so let me just reiterate that listening, finding out more about how do people think, voter education needs to be us. Okay, I don't want to go over it, just to give you time to think, but okay, let me just say the really main point I want to make now is what Dr. Leland has given you is kind of the national picture. But I think let us not forget, and I know he knows this too, and you mentioned it with the local governments, that if you look over a whole trajectory of decades, there have been a lot of changes, right? And you have pointed out all the problems we have, which is certainly valid, but I think it's also important for us to recognize enormous changes that have taken place. I've been working with urban poor communities forever, practically, since the 60s, the Marcos time one. And they were squatters at the time, had no rights, throw them to Sapang Palay. Today, after because of organizing and civil society, NGOs who have supported community-based organizing, you now have alliances of urban poor who can tell the NHA, no, we're not going to pay unless. So, and there are many examples of that. The whole micro-enterprise, women being in charge mainly, and by the way, many of the changes that are demanded in local areas are done by women leaders, rural and urban. So let's not forget that. There have been many changes, rural communities, cooperatives, we have amazing cooperatives that are working. So while we recognize the national issues, let's now really focus much more on who's doing what, maybe in small communities, but once they begin to see what others are doing and they connect, that kind of drive comes up. So sociology, but I would say actually that's why I'm more an anthro, because you're really at grassroots level where you try to see the world as people see them, and we kind of feel that gets lost when you have a very national thing. When I talk about decolonization, I say let's decolonize from only Manila national thinking to really what's happening at local levels where the agency of people is coming out. Those stories are not told, by the way, and we need to tell them, right? So I hope you don't, after this, I was going to say, they're all going to migrate out after this. No, there's a huge future for you in this country. Sorry.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, there is hope. You just have to know where to look. And as I said, I'm not paying too much attention to the national anymore. I'm looking at the local. Because there's so many things happening at the local level, especially if you have good local government officials. No? In Quezon City, Joy Belmonte is doing a good job with so many different initiatives. You know, one of her initiatives is to have clinics for disabled children, no, in different districts. No? Pasig, Vico's doing a good job there with all sorts of good things. Magalong in Baguio. Iloilo is doing urban renewal, right? So, yeah, as Mary correctly pointed out, national tends to be a bit sad, but if you look for local examples, it'd be good. Thank you also, Mary, for that, because it gives me an excuse to plug a project that we had. Now, last year with the comm department, we produced 10 videos of Father Ben plus 10 alumni. And the conversation was really about what does it mean to be a person for others today. And we curated it so that it's really people who are also beacons of hope. No? So tonight it will be Father Ben, 7 p.m. His video goes live on Facebook and YouTube, at Ateneo Facebook and Ateneo YouTube. And Father Ben says essentially the same things. No? Talk to the people, get to know the people, address their problems. He'll probably say the same thing in Buklod Atenista on Friday. And then we have others, like Vince Rapisura, the guy on Saturday, has terrific efforts on microfinance in Mindanao. We visited his work there in Mindanao. Hundreds of thousands of microfinance clients. I was talking to Sir Alex earlier, Jerry Claude, where's Jerry? There, Ateneo Psychology graduate. He pioneered microinsurance at scale in the Philippines. When we talk about life insurance, property insurance, we tend to think in terms of the big players, but he's selling to poorer people. And that's a big deal for them. 15,000 pesos life insurance is a big deal. No? Of course, Mayan Ignacio also in microfinance. Gisela Chongson, Jollibee, getting, she's in charge of Jollibee Group Foundation. And what Jollibee does is that it sources a significant portion of their vegetables from small farmers. You want hope? Listen to our videos. Tonight at 7, every Saturday at 7 p.m. There's the hope for you. Meron. Don't lose hope. Thank you, Mary. Other reactions or Remy, go ahead.
Hi, sir. Okay, this is a really nice talk. I actually have comments, well, like reactions rather. I'd like to echo the one of the things mentioned earlier na our democracy is transplanted like transnationally. Kasi we had the reading po kasi like kay Attorney Joanne about kay Attorney Gatmaitan regarding how yeah, it's a really good one. It was a reading that kind of explained why the Constitution didn't really like work for us. So I just like to like share it in because I think it's heavily related to the talk. Well, from what I've learned in the class, we have the constitutional deconsecration, or like the removal of like the sacred character of the Constitution, wherein we don't really respect it or we don't even like believe in it or much less follow it, is rooted in like the fact that it's rooted in a twofold cause. Number one, like what Sir Leland mentioned, it's the Constitution in general, and even democracy to an extent, is a Western concept. And things like, even like with the difference of values that we have, with like Asians valuing more of collective justice, and like the West valuing more on like individual justice. Even the fact that I think even from our colonizers, I think the Americans leaned more into, I think, civil law, and I think the Spaniards leaned more into common law. And so, I believe that po. The Spaniards leaned more into civil law, and the Americans leaned more into common law. And like the Philippines just adopted both. So parang we really didn't have our own like unique constitution. So that resistance to colonization, coupled with like the deliberate like refusal of Duterte to ascribe to like national like transnational ideals on human rights, is why the Constitution is somewhat something that we never really got to experience for ourselves. And not to add to the depression, but even EDSA to an extent, well, like as explained by Sir, we couldn't exactly call it a constitutional moment because Sir explained it perfectly na we only did it to remove Marcos, but not to really start our own democratic project. And so I guess to wrap this up lang, the way forward that I've learned from Attorney Joanne, she's a lawyer na professor in DS. She's really good. She taught us na maybe we can start by being context specific, because when it comes to development, things like rule of law or like all the bureaucratic elements, all of those things can maybe take a backseat to really ayun nga, like finding out what actually happens like in the localities. Because like as also mentioned by Sir in like one of his sessions, like most of the work in development happens at the local level, not at the national level. So I like to echo that. Thank you, Sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Remy. I got to talk to some law students, and that was my challenge to them as law student leaders of Ateneo Law School. My challenge to them is how do you improve the law that's found on the ground rather than starting off with your abstract legal principles. Say, for example, very concretely, anti-VAUSI, anti-violence against women and their children. The implementation on the ground is really not good. Because the barangay officials will say, away mag-asawa lang yan, parang kasundo kayo, parang ganon. Diba? So the question is, how do you improve on that? No, rather than starting off, but it's not supposed to be that way. Diba? How do you make that a little closer to the ideal? And I guess that's my challenge. We begin with where we are as a country and then try to move it a bit rather than starting off with the parang platonic idea of the ideal democracy and then complaining about why we're not there. It's a better way forward. It's frustrating kasi parang isip natin ang layo. Pero it's the way to go. Go ahead.
Hi, sir. It's such a great talk. One of the things that you said is actually, it's not the voters who need education, but rather us who need education about voters. As someone na parang it's my first time hearing this kasi it's mostly about we need to educate these voters, but with compassion. Pero it's my first time hearing this. So like, as the senatorial elections coming up, what specific insights do we need to develop to better engage the electorate?
Engage how? I think hayaan mo na tong election na to, 2025. It's too late. I guess the understand why the voters choose that way. Bakit si Tulfo? I think I explained it already, di ba? Tulfo Justice, ganun. Bakit si Lito Lapid saka si Bong Revilla? Have you ever watched the Bong Revilla or Lito Lapid film? Right? Na binubugbog na yung manang aapi sa mga may hirap. Diba? You all know them as senators, diba? Pero when we were younger, they had films na yung tagapagtanggol sila ng mga mahihirap. Oh. Bakit si Pia Cayetano? Ano yan? Sa tatay niya, si Rene Cayetano. Rene Cayetano had a radio program Anong radio program yun? Compañero y Compañera, where you call in your legal problems and he will give you free legal advice. Oh, tapos naging television show yan sa ABS-CBN. Nag-guest pa ako dun about bullying sa Compañero y Compañera. So nanalo siyang senador kasi tagapagtanggol ng mga mahihirap eh. Tapos, nung nag-senador siya, si Alan and Pia took over the show. Di ba? You have to understand why people vote. I like to say Risa Ontiveros, for example. Nananalo ba si Risa dahil maganda siya? Maganda siya. Okay. Nananalo ba si Risa dahil progressive siya? Hindi. Hindi talaga. Si Risa kilala sa mga probinsya na nagme-medical mission. Yung Healthy Pinoy campaign niya. Doon siya kilala. Kaya among all the opposition, siya yung nakapasok. Number 12, pero pasok. Right? Si Bongo, ang lakas, di ba? Number 3. Kasi malasakit center eh. Aside from the fact na ang lapit niya kay Duterte, ngayon, malasakit center yung nagpapapanalo sa kanya. Of course, the grumbling on the ground is that the malasakit center is actually just referring you to DSWD or to DOH. Pero still, may dating niya, may malasakit. Unless you begin to understand that, you won't begin to grasp the kind of progressive candidate we'll need in 2028. So 2025, relax muna tayo, nod kayo. Understand, ba't sila yung nananalo? Of course, there are candidates that we support, but I don't know if it's, that's why medyo na-frustrate ako kay Laila. Laila para sa laylayan. And then your napakalaking asset na din lustre. 'Di ba? Tapos yung tono ni Nadine, laban, naku, sayang. 'Di ba? Sayang.
Mataas masyado. Pwede ba? Hindi, I'll just take it out. Okay, it's okay. Okay. You know, when you were talking about yun nga, no, how they relay the profile of the client, that's why media campaigns. I work with I am very strong in my developmental origin. I work still with the NGO community, but a part of me also works with a digital media campaign outfit, which kinds of present stories for particular people, particular products. And Leland was saying earlier, there's really a way of presenting, your message in a more acceptable, clearer manner to the public. So, for example, Risa, Senator Risa, her first campaign was on human rights. And it did not win. It did not help her win. And we were deliberating about that. I think we need to change her campaign. Nobody will go for human rights. They don't understand what human rights is, or it's not very real to them when you go to the, talk to them. So, we replaced it with health. And after 3 tries, finally she made it. So, malaki ang bearing ng media campaign dun sa mga credibility of the message or not credible. Si Bongo, again, Dr. Lilad made an example. He made it appear that Malasakit Center is his. Pero sa totoo, hindi yan kanya. Matagal na tayong merong mga ganyang sistema. Diba? So, our public or the Filipino local communities, they really, kasi mahilig sa radyo, mahilig sa mga artista, talagang napaka-importante na yung media campaign mo mahusay talaga. And I'm hoping for these elections, yun nga, sana yung mga talagang tapat na maglilingkod sa ating mga kababayan, talagang they will have a very good campaign that will also help them win. And I think that's how we can also help. When we relay the messages, for particular candidates in the local level, you can also somehow explain to your neighbors, etc., na ganito yung mga ginawa nila, just to create more awareness about the local candidates. No? So, yes, there is hope, and maybe in 2025 may be a little too late, but still, we keep on trying. Let's just, help out the good candidates at the local level. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Okay, right. Anyone? Sige, sinong siya muna? Tapos ikaw.
Hi, Sir Leland. I hope you
Hello.
remember me. I'm a DS student, and I think when we're talking about things like this, it can be so theoretical. It's really hard to make it tangible. And as a student, I find the small things also matter with these larger conversations that we're trying to have with the people that we meet. But as an Atenean, I think we can start by just saying hello to people. I don't know if you guys experience this, but on campus, after maybe seeing a group mate from 2 sems ago, you already don't say hi. So I think failing on that already, we're not gonna get anywhere on a broader aspect. So maybe I think this is a point of reflection for everyone to think about. Maybe don't just look at your phone and pretend you didn't make eye contact with someone, because those things pile up, and I think it reflects on what we are as people. So yeah, I wanted to
Thank
bring
you. Kumausap. You don't really have to go far. I mean, talk to our security guards, talk to our maintenance. Oh, interviewin nyo sina technicians. Sige lang, go.
Hello po. So I actually really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
I think this is more of a reaction from me, personally. Since I went here, I was half expecting a talk about discussing how it happened in EDSA, but I think this resonated with me more. No? Parang, ano talaga. As an Atenean, I think, siguro, it might be harsh to say, but a lot of us don't realize that we are in a place of privilege. So sometimes we don't think about how people parang perceive things, like we have our sides of the story. So parang yun na mention mo earlier na parang it's better na we have to learn about the voters. So we have to know their motivations. Kasi I think a lot of us, as a person na personally, I think I'm not very politically literate. And I'm trying to parang palitan that. Parang palitan yun. Parang it's so easy to dismiss, yung mga nagiging hinaing ng mga tao. Kaya parang it really resonated with me talaga na parang there's a very serious unequal social divide sa nangyayari sa lipunan natin. Kaya parang in a way, it's good that this talk actually, I hope, opens our eyes to the privilege that we're receiving. The fact that we're here right now, being able to listen to this talk is actually a huge privilege in itself. So siguro yun lang po yung nag-reaction ko. Yeah.
Thank you. Parang we have to imagine, when you disagree with somebody, this is classic negotiation. When you disagree with somebody, try to look at the world from that person's point of view. How is it that that person arrived at that conclusion? How do they see the world such that they arrive at the conclusion that they should vote for President Duterte or President Marcos? Saan nanggagaling? Sometimes we can't imagine not living, for example, in a society with a lot of security guards. But that's the kind of environment that a lot of Filipinos live in, where criminality is present. So once you step into that world or begin to understand it from that point of view, then it makes more sense. Go ahead. Just go to the mic.
Hello. I really enjoyed your talk, especially the nuance you gave, especially with the solution with public service institutions. And I'm just wondering, what do you think the 1987 Constitution should have done? And what criticisms might you give it? As well as, how should we address with political violence, which removes agency from middle and agricultural classes from representing themselves?
I have to be honest, your first question, I haven't thought about it. Yung parang retro fantasy, you know, what could have been done. I think the very concept of a constitution is, as Remy was saying, a little foreign. No, parang, I could say, for example, a bit more participation of the people, but then again, baka, hindi eh. Kasi pag constitution talaga, parang very abstract. Ano yun eh. Yung second, political violence, siguro all I'll say about that is that political violence, unfortunately, is a reality in many places. No. I tend to think that what happened in Duterte's time was the nationalization of a lot of what happens at the local level. We just don't see it. We just don't see it. I mean, a former student of mine, his dad was a congressman, was killed. The dad was killed. No? 2022 elections, there was a barangay councilor killed, no, in one of our partner areas, no, killed. Doesn't make the news, but no, unfortunately, it happens. It happens.
Ayun, hello po. Siguro may one question lang po. Kanina we talk about how, tawag dito, ayaw ng yung what we call mahihirap na tinatawag silang nasa laylayan. But when we look at some of the candidates that have won elections, we see them as defenders of the poor. So parang, how do we reconcile how, tawag dito, parang people think about, tawag dito, like, dapat ba hindi ako yung kausap? Like, does it have to be implicit when it comes to... Ayan.
But they don't say it, di ba? Si Bong Revilla, butots lang siya ng butots dun. Pero, panalo siya. Eh, di ba masaya, di ba? Yung mga ibang seryoso. Actually, one of the things I didn't like about the opposition's late in 2022, ang seryoso nila. Seryoso nila. Mga hindi masaya kasama to mga to. Pagkainuman ko to, baka... Di-depress lang ako sa mga to. Kasi si Bong Revilla, budots lang ng budots doon. May kibudots yung mga tao, di ang saya. Eh, kilala na naman siya eh, na tagapagtanggol na mahihirap. Look at the 2022 campaign. Did Bongbong Marcos ever mention poverty? No. Never. Never. One of my favorite anecdotes. Sabi ko, I was preparing for a talk. So I went to the Bongbong Marcos website. Tapos sabi niya, pag ako naging presidente, ipapalaganap ko ang turismo. Sabi niya, ganun. So akala mo naman, magpa-policy prescriptions na siya for tourism. Hindi. Anong ginawa niya? Itong turismo, ang dami sinusuportahan. Yung mga bankero, yung mga hotel receptionist, yung mga maintenance ng hotel, inisa-isa niya lahat. Yun, panalo. Kasi everyone felt seen. Di ba? Did he mention poverty? Wala. Never. Basta tayo magkasama. Yeah.
Hello, sir. Thank you very much for the talk. So during the talk, you mentioned how it was very important to depoliticize social protection, like universal health care and education. But I think that in order to actually implement such policies, then we would typically think that we would need to actually have the democratic officials elected in the first place. And so I think that there is a bit of a paradox there. So I guess to oversimplify the question in terms of the approach that we sort of take, is democracy in the Philippines sort of suffering from more of a marketing problem in essence? And also to add to that, essentially when Lenny lost, a lot of the sentiments around my family and other people in the same circles as me was that it was usually because the other side like cheated, or that it was the historical revisionism, the troll farms and those kinds of things. But I think a lot of this talk also clarified the ways in which perhaps our own kind of side had its shortcomings as well. So I want to ask how much, I guess, in our approach, should we consider, like, I guess, the lessening of democracy in the Philippines as a them problem or like an us problem in a sense?
I can't
How much-
control them I can control us, di ba? So parang I'd rather say we can do something about the way we talk. Like you say, it's a marketing problem. I definitely think that the comms of the democratic class really sucks. No? Sama talaga ng comms. Even the topic that you choose matters. I remember I was in a discussion before the 2022 elections. Somebody was talking about human rights. Then ako, saka yung mga estudyanteng kasama ko, sabi ko, no, you can do the human rights after you win. But to get elected, tatalino natin sa marketing, why can't we sell our candidates? Diba? The other thought that was going through my head while you were talking, so yes, for me, it's a communications problem. And part of the communications problem, I think, is that earlier I was thinking, I might post this on Facebook later. Kasi sabi ng daughter ko, there's a TikTok trend na what would you tell your younger self? Tapos last year, I realized that my answer to myself, after that traumatic experience of transplanting from Bangkok to the Philippines, what I tell my younger self is, make new memories. You had a really good time in Bangkok. You really miss your friends. But you're here now. Make new memories. I was thinking earlier, it applies to the national situation. EDSA was a great memory. It was a shining moment of democracy. You know what we need? We need a new dream. We need a new dream. Diba? And in my version of the dream, it's a dream where we have universal health care. It's a dream where you won't be poor if you get sick. And why am I saying that? Kasi once you take that first step, medyo may erode mo na yung patronage politics eh. And the money's there. We just have to pressure PhilHealth. We have to pressure DOH. And they're already feeling the pressure, kaya bigla nag-roll out kung ano-anong benefit. Diba? But we have to put more pressure on them. Just yung pressure politics in Mary in terms of housing. We just have to keep putting more pressure in strategic areas. Not the general areas like corruption, human rights, but areas where the dream is shared by us and more people. We need a new dream that's shared, a shared vision of a better future. No? And I think that's central to the comms problem that he was talking about. It starts there. Yes, go ahead. One last siguro before we wrap up. 6:30 na. O, si Sir Alex.
Hello, sir. Good evening po. So, okay, for context, I saw this post just today in social media, and it's trying to characterize what the different universities' roles were in the whole EDSA revolution, and they were saying, oh, UP is the bastion of the revolt, while Ateneo is the center for moral and intellectual protest. And my question is, I don't know if this is controversial, but mine is more on the aspect of it, the education aspect. I wanted to ask if, because perhaps this is not the first time we've tried to be reflexive about how we teach EDSA in Ateneo. We've had a lot of philo, we've had a lot of theo, but do you think at this point we're doing enough in our curriculum for Ateneans, or do you think there are ways for us to improve on that?
I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Honestly, I can only speak for development studies because that's where I'm from. No? And I think in DS, we try our best to talk about the world as it is rather than the world of theory. I cannot speak for the other disciplines. No? But if we're forming Ateneans with these lofty visions that are not grounded, then maybe we're not doing a good job. No? I don't see that much in DS among the DS graduates. May healthy cynicism sila. No? I see it even in the graduates of development studies. No? Parang may pagka, in Tagalog, sweetik. No? May pagka, may ano talaga sila eh. Parang, paano ba ako gagalaw dito? No? Reality as it is and then improve it from there. I cannot speak for the other disciplines, fortunately. Oh, sige. If yung mga iba dito na nandito lang para sa incentive, pwede na kayo umalis siguro kasi kawawa naman kayo.
Yeah, Lilan, thank you very much for the talk.
Salamat,
No,
sir.
I must admit, tama yung description mo. It's a cold shower. No, with regards to what happened in EDSA. Pinag-usapan kasi kanina yung ang hope natin, if I understood it correctly, is at the local level, di ba? Parang mas may mangyayari sa local level. Kaya lang, pag tinignan mo yung local level, ano ba nangyayari doon? It's the political dynasties eh. And they're increasing.
Yeah.
No? So, in other words, parang pag nanalo yung mga Vico Soto, parang halos milagro eh. And can we bank on those types of wins na kinda isolated, di ba? Kung talagang puro political dynasties. Yun lang yung una kong tanong, no? Yung pangalawa, naniniwala ako dun sa pangarap eh. We need a new dream. Definitely. Ang problema lang, sino magsisimula nun? Kasi kung titingnan mo yung national leadership, di ba? Rampant nga yung corruption, garapalan na nga eh. Di ba? Kaya yung mga universal healthcare and all those social protection programs, hindi mapondohan ng gusto kasi binubulsa eh. So, saan mo umpisahan yun? Di ba? And if you're part of the mass, yung masa, ang hirap mangarap pag ganun yung nararanasan mo eh. Di ba? So, anyway, yun lang yung dalawang tanong ko, pero maraming salamat for your talk.
Salamat, Sir Alex. Sige, dun sa una, political dynasties. Actually, personally, I'm maybe because my students are also from political dynasties. Maraming development studies na from political dynasties. Ano? So, my own philosophy there is that political dynasties by themselves don't automatically disqualify a person. My only question is that the only thing that you have to offer? Right? So, our philosophy in development studies is that political dynasties are welcome here. We'll tell you what you need to do. Right? I mean, these are second, third generation political dynasty people. Pero when I see them perform in different positions, okay sila. Ba't ako magrereklamo? Diba? So I'm just hoping that more of them get into position. Of course, we're hoping that alternative candidates also get into position. And there are a few who have been able to get there. Medyo mas mahirap sila manatili sa position. But the advantage of political dynasties is that the name recall makes them a bit more winnable. So the question is, how do we get them to do the right thing? The second thing, in terms of spaces for hope, I think there are always spaces. Like, for example, the national government removed budget from PhilHealth. They refused to give over the subsidy from the same taxes. They got the excess of PhilHealth and put it back into the national treasury. But PhilHealth still has a lot of money. So start there. And then maybe when the national government sees that the money is being used, then all the other funds will start to get back. And then, again, what I was saying earlier, that we need to put the political pressure so that that system is robust. Or, for example, one of the key anchors of universal healthcare is the primary healthcare system. maybe we can start it here in Ateneo, in smaller spaces, no, where our university physician is the primary healthcare for the entire university. Then we can spread that out to other universities. Then we can spread it out to communities. Then, yeah. So we have to start where we are and what we can do with whatever resources we have. Yan. Sige. Sorry Kung ayaw niyo umalis sige. Last na. Mary will have the last say. She's the oldest in the room. So
po, on the topic of political violence, I was reminded of this documentary I watched in Cinemalaya. It's called Maria. It depicts Lenny and also over two people named Maria and their struggles. And one of the people there, her son was a victim of the drug war. And it really details extensively the lack of due process and the whole the pain that she had to go through. But the twist, I guess, in the documentary at the end was that she was rallying for BBM and Duterte. So in those kinds of cases where people in the lower middle class experience those human rights abuses but still end up voting for these politicians, I wonder if you could give like an explanation as to why, because I watched that documentary and they didn't say why. That was their last scene or one of their last scenes, and I was so just depressed after that. So yun, and I guess my second question lang, if it's okay, you mentioned that Filipinos like voting for strong men, and I wonder, is there a more nuanced explanation as to why that is? So, yeah.
the second question is easier than the first. The second question, why do they like strong men? Because strong men address their insecurities. The insecurities of the conditions in which they live in. Yeah. I mean, what happened in America? Americans are afraid. Afraid because of the surge of liberalism, an assault on conservative values, but afraid also because of the effects of globalization, right? So you elect a strong person to help you deal with the fear. Of course, for us, it's not logical, but that's how they see it. Diba? I can't help but relate this particular anecdote. I gave a training to a media company that shall not be named. And they liked our training so much that they made the CEO and the vice presidents of the media company attend our training. So yung audience namin, top C-suite of the media company. And then we got to a discussion kasi the company, most of them were against Duterte. No? This was after the 2016 elections. And I said, Duterte won because it's your fault. So gulat sila. Why? It's your fault because look at your news. Look at your news. First news item. I listen to your news every night. First news item, patay. Second news item, pinatay. Third news item, ninakawan. Fourth news item, pinatay. Fifth news item, national. So sabi ko, hey, you created an imagination where the Philippines is crime-ridden, and you're wondering why Duterte won? Yeah? That's not where the story ended. After the workshop, they brought us up to the C-suite. So the drinks. Yeah, it was drinks. So we were just chatting on the sofa. And then while we were sitting there, their news came on. I was quiet. I was listening. Patay. Patay, pinatay. Na-snatch. One of the VPs beside me said, oo nga, no? Diba? The way we imagine, the way we construct the world, it affects the way people make decisions. I don't know if that tangentially touches on your question. What was the other one? There were two, where there's just one? Just one. Okay. What's the other one? Ay, mahirap. I really don't know. Baka patronage na yan. Sino maaasahan mong mag-abot kapag may pangangailangan? I think that's really why Rojas lost. Kasi hindi siya mukhang malalapitan. Eh. Di ba? Trying hard. Pero mukhang masyadong distant. They're looking for someone na matapang, na may malasakit. Kaya nga yung slogan ni Duterte, and I'll end on that note, Duterte's slogan was tapang at malasakit. Perfect combination. That's what voters are looking for. No? Tapang at malasakit. Sabi ko nga parang, yung kandidato mo ba, ako itapon ko sa tondo, mabubuhay ba yan? Di ba? Si Lito Lapid, mabubuhay yan. Di ba? Si Bong Revilla, mabubuhay yan. Pero yung mga kandidato nating medyo sosyal, mabubuhay ba yan? Siguro, that note, if you're thinking national, yan, tapang at malasakit. Lalo na yung malasakit, napakahalaga niyan. No, in the end, mukha ka bang taong malalapitan kapag may pangangailangan? And I guess I'll end on my note of what we need to do is, dapat hindi na kailangan lumapit sa tao. Dapat may sistema na kapag ako may sakit, alam ko na kung saan ako pupunta. At hindi yun sa politiko. Si PhilHealth, sagot na niya. Basta mag-ward lang ako, wag ako mag-private room. Di ba? Basta mag-ward lang ako, sagot na ng PhilHealth lahat. Hindi na ako mag-aalala. We have to get to that point. To remove the importance of the politician. No. Sige. Maraming salamat. Si Mary, sorry, Mary. Yes. Guess Mary's age.
Yes, thank you. But I couldn't resist because there were two concepts that really worried me that were coming out. And I just want to address those. One was that human rights is really a foreign Western thing and doesn't really fit us. No, look at it the other way around. And so, I don't know if some of you were in my class last year where we looked at human rights in people's everyday lives. And we use the concept to start with local people, ordinary people, and say, ano dapat sa inyo? Anong ibig sabihin ng dapat? And then, sana. Ano bang sana? And then we found people will talk about particular things. You know, bakit naman yung anak ng mayor who became the valedictorian wasn't even qualified? Hindi naman tama yun. Hindi ba? Ganon. So the sense of there is something wrong is part of people's concept of what are their rights. Now, of course, then the next thing is once people begin to think that there have to be an organizing process. You know, and that's the role of organizing, and very often political parties, local level, civil society groups, NGOs, church groups, that's who helps people think through what they already know. And the same with democracy. It's fairness. They don't talk about democracy, but fairness. They don't talk about karapatan until somebody teaches them, yeah, you should think that way. But let's go from people's side upward instead of starting at the top and trying to make people fit there. That's the first. So human rights is very much a part of Filipino people's lives. Only we have to, all of us have to understand it as they see it, and what will they fight for, you know? All right. The second thing is, I was in EDSA today, and this morning, and that hardy group that's still pushing, right? I just want to emphasize that we have to divide between what happened in '86, which was really one of our finest moments. And let's not denigrate that by saying, well, you know, because afterwards it was all betrayed. Yeah, granted, and we heard why and so on, and we have to fix that. But let's not deny what happened after 20 years of that kind of dictatorship, really, And just the organizing and the political parties from left and right for once acted together, yes, maybe to throw out Marcos, but for many because they wanted another kind of society. They had a sense of more fairness. Fairness, that's what democracy is, fairness sa kanila. So let's separate. Do not undermine the greatness of 1986. The people who led it had a right to be recognized and not denigrated, but recognize that, yes, we have failed afterwards in many ways to make the hope come about. And the new dream, I think, is quite true. But remember, there's a lot that's happening in this country, a lot of very positive and encouraging things. You just have to find it, right? And be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, 86, definitely something that we have to commemorate, especially after the struggles that people of that generation, older than me, I was 12 years old, too young to be really a participant, and living too far away. So definitely something that we should deem as a historical and a shining moment. 39 years later, we need a new dream that will include more people. We need a shared dream that will transcend our political divides. And let me end with a plug. But please watch the videos tonight. Yeah. Because these people have their dreams, and they're really living the dream. And maybe we can all pitch in and help out in our own way. Thank you. Agree ka ba?
I love what you